Hey there everyone. Today we're going to continue in our series of learning how to make a website mobile responsive. Let's get started. Hey there everyone. Today in Loop Coding Center's web design series, we're going to continue on learning how to make a website mobile responsive. In the last episode, we touched on different measurements and or metrics we could use to create elements that respond a bit better to a way a website reshapes itself, as well as quickly reviewing what CSS Grid and Flexbox can do. Today, our primary focus is going to be on a media query. With CSS media queries, we can directly place rules inside of our CSS, or essentially breakpoints, that will only activate when our screens are a certain pixel width. So what this means is that if we want to set a minimum or a maximum width for certain elements and how they react based on those breakpoints, we can create a website that is fully mobile responsive and will portray the information you only want to portray in the case that you have something too large for a phone or too small for a desktop. So to get started, we'll review the setup just once again, and then we'll directly jump into media queries. So to begin, our setup today is going to be similar to the same setup we had in the previous video. We'll have some containers with with cards inside, specifically with an ID for a container, and an individual class of card for each of the individual elements we want inside of our containers. We'll use this as an example to show the type of responsiveness we can add, as well as the fact that we can wrap items in this setting. But for today, our main premise is going to be changing the potential display methods as well as the width based on the media breakpoints. So let's go ahead and discuss exactly what that is. Now that we've become familiar with our setup, and we'll dive right into the media queries. To start, I'd like to point out the syntax that we'll be using. Previously, we've used the @ symbol for a couple of things here and there, but for today, we'll bring it back just for the media query. So what we'll do is go ahead and type out the @media rule, and then we'll have to follow this with a bit of syntax that can be kind of confusing. When the media query was originally created, the purpose of it was to create a universal way to portray the information on not only a screen, but also a PDF, also a screen reader. So because of this, we find that the media query rule has a couple of extra steps that are required in order to get things to happen. So to get started, we'll go ahead and type only, and then we'll define the only as a screen. What we could do here is define all and have the media query redefine our CSS and HTML based on all the formats that it can accommodate for. But to keep things simple and logical, we'll stick with only screen for today, and I'll add an and. The reason being that we have a definition for what platform we'll want to use this for, but now we have to define the query and or breakpoints and really define the actual rules for our media query now. So to do so, we'll have to set up a pair of parentheses and then define the max width. With a max width, what we can do is create an upwards waterfall. This essentially allows us to define rules for a mobile phone and then not have to worry about any of that code from the bottom coming up. Instead, we create a normal waterfall where things only change as you go downwards on the media query breakpoints. So I'll show you guys an example of that later on once we have multiple media queries. But to get started, I'll begin with a max width of 1000 pixels. So with this, what we'll be able to do is define, and I'll go ahead and set up the brackets so that we have the full syntax of a media query. But with this, we'll be able to define different forms of action for different breakpoints within our CSS. Now that we have our media query syntax set up, what we'll do is go ahead and define our first rule. So to begin, what I'll do is go ahead and copy, oh, not that, not paste, but copy my code directly into this container for our media query rule. In here, we'll be able to redefine any CSS we've made so far, and specifically only the things we want to change, because if we loaded everything into a file again, we might as well have created another CSS file. But in this instance, because of CodePen's limitations with pages, what we'll do is go ahead and just put the ID for our container inside. Now, past this, we'll go ahead and redefine this as flex. And to create a visual to show you guys that these work, oh, well, it's already working, I'll also set up a background color of navy, let's say. So, with this, we'll find that our background color will change depending on the breakpoint. So, if you can watch down here, you can see that the second we scroll past 1,000 pixels, our CSS changes instantaneously. And with this, we can make changes to adjust for mobile responsive sites. For example, previously our items wouldn't stack, and this minimum width is still an issue. So what we can do now is go ahead and select this card component, and if our viewport is under 1,000 pixels, now what we can do is simply set a min width rule here, and here we'll set it to 20 pixels, or let's just do 5 virtual width to no, let's set it to 25 pixels. That way we can have, and it looks like my bracket went missing, so I'll add an extra one here. That way we can only have this CSS value apply if we have it in a flex stack. So like that, let's raise it to 50, and with this we'll find that it will only shrink to 50 pixels, and we'll fix this sliding off of the screen by adding the flex wrap. So far we haven't really gone too far past what we were able to achieve last week. But what we'll do now is go ahead and define a CSS grid and redefine it for, we'll define a grid for the desktop view, and then we'll redefine it using media queries for mobile. So before showing you guys this example in action, I want to point out the setup I've made, because I would have taken just a little bit to type this all out, because it is rather long code. So what we'll do is go ahead and set up our grid and set up some template rows and columns, one with auto and the other at a 30 virtual height. For the columns, we'll set 3 identical 20 virtual widths. That way we can go ahead and fit our boxes within those spaces. And then, as our alternative, for below the media query of 750 pixels, so a max width of 750 pixels, we'll apply a different grid template rows and grid template columns to our container. So what we'll do is actually just change a single variable. We'll change it from 3 rows with the 320 virtual width values to 2 rows. So all we have to do is delete one of the 20 virtual width values, and like that, once we break our 750 media query, we'll see that our objects automatically stack to 2 rows. So in the case where we have a lot of different objects, or we have a media gallery for a website, we can adjust the gallery to display a certain amount of things within a certain column based on the media queries. This can become a lifesaver when it comes to menus. This can also become a lifesaver when it comes to displaying lots of different information, as well as really giving you the power and a more power than Flexbox lends you in controlling how items move around when you switch them from a horizontal view to a vertical one. Because with this, you can individually control each individual item instead of having to use a individual aligned self on each individual item, which in the future you might not have control of if you are using a content management system has you self-defined tags. So with that, we have a quick introduction into media queries. Next week, we'll actually continue on with this so that we can look at the accessibility side of media queries, as well as touching on what best practices are in terms of what media queries are most common, as well as what the best practice is for utilizing the media queries when it comes to navigation, galleries, and other specific items we'll find as common patterns in web. So until then, have a nice week.